Ustadh Sohaib, inshallah, maybe we'll start with your recitation of the first half of the page.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. مثلهم كمثل الذي استوقد نارا فلما أضاءت ما حوله ذهب الله بنورهم وتركهم في ظلمات لا يبصرون صم بكم عمي فهم لا يرجعون أو كصيب من السماء فيه ظلمات ورعد وبرق يجعلون أصابعهم في آذانهم من الصواعق حذر الموت والله محيط بالكافرين يكاد البرق يخطف أبصارهم كلما أضاء لهم مشوا فيه وإذا أظلم عليهم قاموا ولو شاء الله لذهب بسمعهم وأبصارهم إن الله على كل شيء قدير. صدق الله العظيم. I could also then share from the translation, inshallah. So this translation, as I've explained previously, is a new one. It is actually so brand new that you are the first people to see it. Even the two Ustadhs sitting in the studio haven't seen this before. We are reading it here. So this is based on the tafsir of Ibn Ashur. Of course, it is, in many ways similar to things that you've seen before, but we have, in a way, the standard looking version and then the expanded version, which includes more layers of information from the tafsir of Ibn Ashur. So the translation of what we have read so far, their case is like that of a man who kindled a fire. So whose case? This is referring back to the hypocrites, as we had been covering in the ayat which preceded this one. Their case is like that of a man who kindled a fire. Once it illuminated everything around him. God took away their light and left them in utter darkness, unable to see. So we're going to have a question on their light. Deaf, mute, and blind, they will never return. Or they are compared to a cloudburst from the sky. It comes with darkness, thunder, and lightning. The people stick their fingers in their ears against the thunderbolts for fear of death. God has the disbelievers surrounded. The lightning almost snatches away their sight. Every time it lights the way for them, they walk in it, but when it goes dark on them, they stand still. If God so willed, he would take away their hearing and sight. God is capable of all things. So below that, we have got the expansion of these ayahs, and we'll just start with the first ayah here. And this adds some more information from the tafsir of Ibn Ashur, reflected in translation and the kind of things that are often found in brackets. And sometimes we have also some alternative way of understanding, because in tafsir works, you usually have more than one possibility presented. Right? Translations usually are restricted to one by the nature of the genre, right? So there are cases like that of a man who kindled a fire. This is a case of striking amthal in the Qur'an, which is something which is a very, very frequent and very powerful way that the Qur'an speaks to us through examples and comparisons. And with mathaluhum kamathal, we've got this sense that it's not just simple comparison, but a compound one, where there are different elements of their situation and their case which correspond to a compound image, which is presented here in the ayah. This first image and then followed by another one about the cloudburst. So there are cases like that of a man who kindled a fire. So we're now picturing somebody in the wilderness. He's trying to get some light in order to find his way. Once it illuminated everything around him, God extinguished his fire like he took away from the hypocrites their light. So if we look to the pronouns that God took away their light, one can understand this in more than one way. But Ibn Ashur is of the view that ذهب الله بنورهم is now coming back from the image towards those who are being represented by the image, namely the hypocrites. But just like the light of the fire was extinguished, so is the light extinguished from the hypocrites. And this goes back to what had been described before about how they would come into the company of the believers and they would say, we believe. And maybe even during those times, they would be hearing words of Iman and faith. They would be hearing words of guidance. They might even start to feel some of that, by acting as believers, as they say, fake it till you make it, right? So they're almost like responding to the guidance. But then when they go back and they take off their garments of Iman, that is a return to the darkness which then engulfs them and left them abandoned in utter darkness. So dhulumat being a plural is usually understood and better understood, more clearly understood as meaning just so much darkness. It's so intensely dark. Unable to see anything or to restore the light. This is the expanded thing. There are a couple of alternative ways of reading it, which are represented here in the angle brackets, right? So once it illuminated everything, or once it burned bright in his surroundings, that's very similar in meaning. But also you could see that the dhulumat, the utter darkness, could be understood as multiple darknesses. So he says 3 darknesses can be, understood from what's discussed here. Number 1, the darkness of kufr, of unbelief. Secondly, the darkness of kadhib, of deception. And thirdly, the darkness of al-istihza' bil-mu'minin, the mocking of the believers. So those are the things that had been laid out in the preceding ayahs, right? I hope I'm not taking anything away from Imam al-Baqarah here, because this is connections and munasabat, which inshallah we'll hear more about. I'll come back to say something later about maybe the fire versus light and the different words for light if we don't find that with the other mufassirin. But I'll pause here to hear some of the fawaid from the others.
I just want to mention the thank you, Jazakallah khair, Ustadh Sohaib, for the bit about it starting with individual, but then it saying binurihim, the plural, as you translated as their light. Imam Bukhari says that so that it is not assumed that some benefited from the light while others did not. So Allah removed the benefit of that light from all of them. Whereas the man who lits it may be individual, but those who can benefit can be many. They're all removed. No. And he's also says something about light and nur and why the word nur is used instead of diya. Maybe you're going to get into it, but I'll jump into it if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Allah removed their light, nur, instead of the word diya, as he says the latter is stronger. In the Quran says, we made the sun as diya and the moon as, what is the verse? وَجَعَلْنَا الشَّمْسَ ضِيَاءً وَالْقَمَرَ نُورًا, if I'm not misquoting the verse. So the latter word is used in a verb form at the beginning to indicate the strength of the light, because it says فَلَمَّا أَضَاءَتْ. So the diya is used in a verb form to indicate the strength of the light at the beginning, but the weaker form at the end. So that's what he sort of alludes to.
Hmm.
No, Allah.
Just to understand this better as well, maybe you could also shed some light on this too, into my darkness at least. But like Ibn Kathir talks about, like this analogy indicates that they believed and then disbelieved. And Ustadh Sohaib, you did mention something similar as well. So would that mean some of the hypocrites, or I'm not too sure the thing we could use, but like, I mean, did they believe and then disbelieve literally, or like some of them were complete hypocrites. They didn't believe at all times. I mean, that's what a hypocrite is. But then here we're seeing in the interpretation that there is belief and then disbelief. How could we reconcile that?
Mm-hmm.
Do-
Is that to
I
me?
Sorry?
I was just wondering if you're asking Ustadh Sadeq, because
I mean, I just really like that, to be honest, because
تفضل أستاذي.
uh,
And how can they reconcile the fact that this implies that they did believe?
yeah,
Yeah.
and then disbelief, right? So
Yeah,
you
yeah. I think it's not necessarily implying that, but it's okay for us to actually build that into our overall image, that things are not so black and white. You know, this is a murky business, hypocrisy, right? So on the side of the believers, you know, there are those who are on the side, you know, they are in the side of Iman. They are people of Iman. You have the strong ones who would never face any doubts and would never also be the subject of doubt, right? They are the clear believers. They are in the front lines. They are clear in their speech. They are clear in their associations and their disassociations, right? As we say, al-wala wal-bara. There's no question about the elite believers, right? Even then, you might find that some of them, like the famous narration, I feel like we might have said it in the last session, where Umar radiallahu anhu was asking Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, who was given the names of the hypocrites. He said, just tell me, you can't just close the list to me, but just tell me, am I on that list? You know? So they might have still had that self-doubt, but nobody could say, or maybe Umar and Abu Bakr and Uthman and Ali, you know, these elite believers who would become the Khalifas, that they were, you know, in the category of the hypocrites. But then there were, of course, many different, you know, types of believer who came into the deen at different times and different circumstances, who may have been weaker in their faith, because faith is like that. It's not of one level. You know, there is an entry into faith, but then there is a growth into faith. And there are those who are weaker and more vulnerable, and the Quran is sometimes talking about their situation. And there were those who also retained some links and some questionable associations with different groups of the unbelievers because of, you know, family relations, because of old, you know, tribal loyalties. And that's again a concern that is addressed in the ayat of the Quran, that not to take them as awliya instead of the believers, and not to be in this state of, you know, bringing doubt on yourself, for example, by associating with them, or by remaining amongst them instead of making hijrah at the time when everyone was called upon to come to Medina. So amongst the, you know, the believers, there are some different categories and levels. There are those who are closer, you know, away from the elite level. So can we say then, on the flip side, that amongst the unbelievers, there were those who were weaker in kufr, right? If I can put it in that way, which is to say they are closer to being persuaded. You know, you even have these narrations, which are, you know, these amazing moments where, isn't it Al-Walid, he goes and listens to the Quran one day, and then his, you know, his companions in kufr, they're like, what's wrong with you? Why have you gone crazy by, you know, you're clearly bewitched, as they would say, by what he heard, you know. And he says about the Quran, it has this sweetness and this amazing brilliance within it. So they have to sort of strengthen strengthen him in not iman but in kufr, right? But iman in their thing, because iman and kufr, just keep in mind, is relative to what you're believing in and disbelieving in, right? So we are also, be careful here how you're going to interpret the next sentence. We are also kafir in what? فَمَن يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ. Whoever disbelieves, who does kufr in false gods and believes in Allah, right? So we are kafir towards that, and mu'min towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they were kafir towards Allah and mu'min towards their, you know, their false things. So why I'm saying this is because then amongst the hypocrites, there was the opportunity for them to hear the guidance, to be guided, and to become persuaded. And part of what was going to make that perhaps happen is the association with the believers, right? For those who were just running away and not listening to the Quran and putting cotton in their ears so that they wouldn't hear it, they're the furthest from being guided. But those who would sit with the Messenger, imagine imagine what kind of kufr levels of kufr that would be needed to not believe when you are with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, that's why those kafirin of that era are the worst kafirin that could ever kufr. You know why? Because they see the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which, you know, for us is the greatest desire we can have. Like, you know, our iman fills us with that longing. They were in his circle listening to him recite the Quran to them and explain the Quran to them and the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and yet they remained upon their unbelief. But يَكَادُ الْبَرْقُ يَخْطَفُ أَبْصَارَهُم. We'll come to this in the next image. You know, it's still a bright guidance, and on the flip side, as we'll see, it also contains, you know, their mention. You know, imagine these ayat now. These ayat in Surah al-Baqarah are being recited. While they are doing all this, the ayat come which talk to them about what they are doing, right? So it's so self-referential that it's talking about the ayat. These ayat that we are reading are ayat talking about ayat. You understand what I'm saying? These ayat are talking about ayat of the Quran which were revealed concerning the hypocrites. And these are ayat concerning the hypocrites. So what's happening here, we are as if we are listening in on this discourse and we're just watching them be exposed. You know, they have their plot and they think it's so clever. And then along come these ayat, which is saying, in the morning they're doing this, in the evening they're doing that. When they're with you, they're saying this, and when they go back, they're saying that. And they are hearing these ayat, and they are having to pretend, you know, they're having to pretend that it's not talking about us. Oh, it must be somebody else. You know, subhanallah, I don't know if any of you watches TV. You shouldn't. It's very bad and everything. But there's a series nowadays called The Traitors, right? Has anyone been? No, nobody's been watching that, probably, right? But there's an Australia version. That's why I mentioned it. So subhanallah, despite having a lot of difference, of course, there is the inherent similarity it has with the situation is that's what these people are, the traitors. And they have to conceal who they are and talk to the believers as if the munafiqeen are a third party, you know, as if they're somebody else. Oh yeah, those munafiqeen. I'd hate to be one of them, you know, but I'm a faithful like you. I almost started to think we should call the believers the faithful and the munafiqeen the traitors, you know, maybe in the next translation, inshallah, after this one.
Yeah, I like your thing about it. It's the ayat, talking about the ayat, about the munafiqeen. It's like you mentioned a film, if it's a director, if this is maybe a bad analogy, but sometimes I like to imagine like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the director and we are all actors in this world. But here the director is also showing how some people are acting with the signs, with his directions to the other actors. But it looks like in the first page of Surah Baqarah, it's this is just my own personal thoughts. It's explaining to us some signs of the munafiqs. But in these examples, it's going into within their mind and just showing us their psychology. It's a bit scary because sometimes you resonate. May Allah make us not resonate, but we can see ourselves falling into this situation. Allahumma hdina wa hdi bina, ameen. Just Imam Qurtubi, we have in the notes, he says, what they falsely show as faith is only what guarantees marriage and so on, inheritance, because they're legally treated as Muslims. But he's saying in the hereafter, there's nothing left for them in the akhirah. It could also mean that the Muslims' conversation with them is like the light of fire, and their avoidance of connecting with them is like the absence of that light. That's what's been quoted from Imam Qurtubi's tafsir.
And the darkness, Ustadh Sohaib, you've talked about like the layers. Ibn Kathir describes it as doubt, disbelief, and hypocrisy. So he puts these into within the darkness.
Which one is it?
وَتَرَكَهُمْ فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ, where it says,
okay.
and so he says that it's doubt,
Yeah.
disbelief, and hypocrisy. So we didn't go into the next verse, right, Ustadh Sohaib? I mean, you did read the translation of it, but
we can address that just now. So there was also like just a little bit more that Ibn Ashur says about the fire and the light. So again, there are actually different ways that this image can be understood and the construct of it. So, you know, we might be sharing some slightly alternative things from the Mufassirin that we have consulted, but it's a fairly open thing. Like we shouldn't take it as because one Mufassir says it's understood this way, that's the end of the story. The nature of parables and examples like this is that it really opens doors to pondering, right? And that again is part of the the feature of the Quran and its style and its approach to appealing to your mind, not just the rational aspect of your mind, but also there's an emotional aspect to this. I like to say the imagination. I like to think about how the Quran fires up your imagination, right? Pun not intended for once, fires up, right? So your imagination is key to tadabbur, right? Pondering in this case, starts with picturing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to you, right? And now, I mean, I don't know about, you made the comparison with the film. I think there's sometimes a lot of things that we could think about in the Quranic presentation that reminds us of things that we have experienced in cinema and so on, right? Even sometimes the scenes and transition between scenes and splicing of, lots of things that we can see as, of course, it's not that he is compared to a filmmaker, but rather that people have then produced things that reflect some aspects of the way that the Quran tells stories, and not just tells stories, but presents evidences and is convincing to the heart, to the soul, to the mind altogether. So here, let's not say that there's just one way to read this image. But if we do understand that in the first place, this is a person who is out there kindling a fire because of that need. What's taken away is his nur. Is that because that's to bring us back to the fact that it's not about the fire, it's about the nur of iman, the nur of guidance, is what is taken away from these hypocrites. So for a moment they're carrying a torch, but it's taken away and they're left in maybe more darkness than they were in before. Maybe as they continue to do this, this duplicitous behavior day after day, night after night, it's just becoming darker and darker for them, instead of them coming more and more into the light. So ذهب الله بنورهم, rather than talking about the nar, which was that person's nar in the image, right? So the nur is a very common image in the Quran, that the guidance is light, is nur, right? And though, or diya, as we mentioned, is the term that is used earlier in the
لما أضاءت.
Yeah, لما أضاءت. But again, nur is the more common, sort of familiar word in the context of religious guidance. So it's like the ayah makes us realize that what's being actually meant is that God has taken away their religious guidance, right? As opposed to just thinking about the fire. So although this is not the first mathal to have been revealed in the Quran, it's the first one that we come across in its full glory in the reading from the beginning. So it's like it contains some kind of primer to how to read a mathal within it, right? So the beginning of the ayah is the image and the symbol, and then at the end of the ayah, it's like a reminder of what is being symbolized, right? So I can just open up for the translation of the next ayah. So the translation just by itself was deaf, mute, and blind. Many translations, by the way, say deaf, dumb, and blind, which I think is by now considered not politically correct, or not a respectable term anymore for people who cannot speak. That's the meaning of abkam, plural bukum, right? So deaf, mute, and blind, I think, is a more contemporary. They will never return. So just to expand on that, the hypocrites are all spiritually deaf, mute, and blind. So these things are all put in there because, just to clarify, first of all, of course, this is not talking about physical incapacities. That should be fairly obvious. But secondly, that it's not that some of them are deaf, some of them are mute, some of them are blind. But Ibn Ashur is saying that the construction summun, bukumun, umyun means they all have all of these characteristics. So they will never return to the way of the believers. Now, if we're talking about the hypocrites, what's being referred to rather than the image, they will never return to the way of the believers. Because having lost their faculties, they can neither see it and perceive it and find it, nor can they hear the people where they are. No one can shout instructions to them. They cannot find someone and ask for instructions. They don't have the faculties to ever get back to that path, because they are now devoid of all these things that would allow them to do so. So I'll pause here for any reflections on that.
Imam Baqai said something similar, that once the analogy is finished, the real purpose of the dhulumat is explained, and hence, and like you said, deaf, mute, and blind. Interesting, he talks about again, beginning with deafness due to the importance of hearing the caller, calling to the way of God. And فَهُمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ, they do not return. It doesn't say return from what, because it's sort of, it generalizes all types of darknesses and errors and dalalat and things people can be in. So it's a general state. That's it.
And just, I guess, similar things to what you said, Ustadh Sohaib. Like, these people, they don't hear goodness, they don't speak beneficial things, they can't see guidance. All these things are taken away from them. They don't have the capacity anymore. Imam Sa'ad Nursi has a good analogy as well, a contemporary scholar, where he talks about a person who lights up a torch, and as soon as the torch gets broken, it's kind of the opposite, but then he sees, like, with the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's able to give meaning to everything. He's able to understand the purpose and all the surroundings. So this is the other way around for hypocrites. They hold on, if they want to hold on to their light, they can't see with the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The verse says, Allah nuru samawati wal ard. Allah is the nur, the light of the heavens and the earth. And so once that light is no longer your reference point, then what you see, what you hear, and what you speak is really not within, what comes with nur, the Qur'an and its commandments. So,
I suppose that's that it's interesting, because then you could look at the way the ayah presents a person who is trying to do something from his own effort. Istawqada, even like an exaggerated form of saying awqada. So it's like he's going to some effort to kindle this fire, and it's not going to be something that he's just going to be able to rely on his own effort, because then dhahab Allahu bi nurihim, implying that God, an act of God, has wiped out his fire. He cannot, whatever effort he puts in, he cannot stop the wind, he cannot stop the rain, he cannot stop whatever is causing his fire to go out, right? Even Ibn Ashur explains that, ذهب الله بنورهم even implies that it wasn't even any cause that can be perceived. Attributing it to God kind of makes it, an implication that there is no even perceptible cause, identifiable cause, but it's just that God has not willed for you to have light and it's taken away from you. So we could then we could see the parable from that angle, as Ustadh Ahmed has indicated, that
because
we want to find the way, or we want to find our way in life, but وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجْعَلِ اللَّهُ لَهُ نُورًا فَمَا لَهُ مِن نُور. Whomever God does not provide light, then he will never have light.
Yeah, I like to think, in connecting with that analogy, that istawqada, so there's more effort, there's being, but instead of believing in the light, that the natural light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought down, the nur, Quran, they're trying to create their own parallel light on the side, and then Allah takes away the light from that. And that's a good way to look at it.
And it's what I came to understand, rightly or wrongly, from when they say innama nahnu muslihun, they've been told don't cause corruption in the earth, and then they say we are actually making things right. So what is it that you're making right? What do you think that is wrong that needs you to make it right? So is it the guidance of Allah and the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ that you're seeing as the problem, and you are seeing yourselves as the fixers? You see yourself as the solution. So you should be seeing that light and recognizing it, but you are that blinded to the truth that you, first of all, think that there is darkness there. Then you are trying to strike up a light, thinking that then people should follow you, and people should come to your light, and people should come around your campfire and sing your campfire songs, right? Instead of going and listening to the ayat and reciting the ayat of Allah. So
yeah, it's like they've turned in that analogy, they've turned their backs to the sun and they're trying to get light from a firefly. I was also reflecting with the the sufaha, there's this extreme arrogance that comes with them, like how you can't even accuse us of being mufsid. We are the innama nahnu muslihun. We are the only people that could be we're the only people working towards peace.
And they are the sufaha.
And then the sufaha, like as if badia ray hasha, like as if people and we'll, inshallah, we have nasib in Surah Munafiqun, they have this excessive pride about themselves, even their physical appearance. تعجبك أجسامهم وإذا تقول تسمع لقولهم. When they speak very eloquently, but like almost in a magical way. But there's they have this elitism to them. Allahu alam. That's what sometimes I reflect more on the previous weeks than the upcoming weeks. But there's this general arrogance that comes with munafiqs that were also shown in the last week's pages. Yeah.
And that is why the word dhulumat is actually so expressive. There's a sound issue. I don't know if you're catching that. I'll keep speaking unless I'm told not to. So the fact is that these dhulumat, elsewhere in the Quran, the descriptions of the unbelievers being under water, and there are layers of darkness. Dhulumatun ba'duha fawqa ba'd, right? Darkness is one upon the other, right? And in a nicer image, the baby is inside 3 layers of darkness, right, inside the mother's womb, right? But going back to the sea one, these are layers of stacked darkness. It's compound ignorance and compound obstinance and compound disbelief, right? So the fact of that arrogance, then, it will prevent them from ever finding the truth, right? Their attitude is such that they will not be able to come back because they are willfully blind, they are willfully deaf, they are willfully mute, right? And each of these we could think more about. In what I looked at of tafsir, I found that more attention is given as before to the hearing and the sight being lost, because as we saw before, ختم الله على قلوبهم which is to do with the aql, to do with their thinking faculties as well. You could link it to the head as well. وَعَلَى سَمْعِهِمْ وَعَلَى أَبْصَارِهِمْ غِشَاوَةٌ, right? So the hearing and the sight we already understood as related to hearing the ayat of Allah and the guidance which is revealed, and seeing the signs in the creation, pondering on those to find the truth. So when these are blocked off, you are not able to benefit from the observed signs or the revealed signs, right? But the mute part, maybe you came across something. I'll put it as a question, but I didn't find that there was usually much focus on this new piece about not being able to speak. I explained it just earlier in the context of people who are lost and on a path. They're not able to call out for help. They're not able to ask someone for guidance. So that could indeed be part of it. That could be one level. But I think it could be interesting to think about how they were mute, in what sense they are mute, compared to the believers. Any thoughts on that? Sorry to throw it through. You do it to me, so I'm doing it back. Going in the deep end.
Well, just I guess what I found was it just mentioned they were not able to speak beneficial things. That's what it said.
Yeah.
When explaining the mute part, but I'm not sure if Ustadh Sadeq had anything.
Same, but it says قدم السمع لأنه عمدة في ذلك, and then وثنى بالقول لأنه يمكن الأصم الإفصاح عن المراد. So yeah, similar thing, because that's what allows a person who's mute to speak eloquently about his intentions. But I think there's something in there, you're right, that perhaps there's a bit more mystery and more with hikmah, Allahu Alam.
You get this picture of the monkeys. You know what I'm talking about? Even we've got the emojis. It's the ones like, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Maybe there's a sort of commonality of this kind of image in different cultures, and in the Arabic language, this is to as a comprehensive lack of ability and lack of benefit. A person is just sort of blocked off from every angle. Elsewhere where Allah says, qiyaman wa qu'udan wa ala junubihim, can be taken literally. We can pray and remember Allah standing and sitting on our sides, but it's also like a kind of 360-degree description. It just means, in all states, they remember Allah in all states and all situations. So here it just may mean they are blocked off from any route to receiving or delivering goodness.
Should we move on?
Yeah,
maybe?
let's open up the next ayah. So أو كصيب من السماء. So the أو, of course, means or. So the way this kind of works in the Arabic language and the way of expression within the Qur'an is that there is another image given. So, or in another way, they are compared to this image. And again, it's not about they are like the clouds. It's not about one-for-one correspondence, but it's about a situation with a situation, right? So it is not that they are the clouds. So that's why in the translation here, we've got the word people passing under to help make that easy to make that correspondence, right? So, or in another way, they are compared to people passing under a cloudburst from the sky. The brackets here is because, minas sama can just mean like a description of where the cloud is. And sometimes you have these expressions in the Quran and in Arabic and in other languages, which are just part of the description. You could say the ayah which says, وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ, or any bird that flies upon its two wings. It's not a specific kind of bird, because that's birds, generally, or flying birds generally. So here it could just be, a cloud in the sky, just as like that. Or minas sama may mean, from high up in the sky, because then there's a particular kind of intensity for this rain then that's coming from high up and directly above. It comes with darkness, this darkness of night, thunder, and lightning. So it comes with, it's perhaps clearer because the cloud doesn't contain necessarily all these things, but it's accompanying the whole situation of this cloud which is bursting with rain. The people stick their fingers in their ears against the thunderbolts for fear of death. Remember, God has the disbelievers surrounded and they will meet their fate. So, Wallahu muhitun bil kafirin. I think this, what we've got here, is quite a unique translation from what having compared it with some others. Muhitun bil kafirin would literally mean that God is all around or even surrounds the disbelievers. But that would kind of miss the sense which can be conveyed in English idiom, because in English idiom we would say, come out, we've got you surrounded, right? Put down your weapons. So it implies that God sees them from every angle. He is there. They will find no escape from him, right? They will find no escape. Whatever he wills, it will be done, right? So just to pull out from these notes that I've also added, here in this image, it is about these ayat which are talking about them. These ayats which contain warnings for the unbelievers. They are like thunderbolts, and they don't want to hear these things, and they would like to hide away from hearing these things, because nowadays on the internet there's a kind of meme. If you mention something that is like a common bad habit or something, people say, I'm in this picture and I don't like it. So they will report image, I'm in this picture and I don't like it. So the hypocrites were like, I'm in this ayah and I don't like it. And it would cause them pain and they would want to run away. But this is something which they cannot simply escape from. The travelers in this scenario, there are people passing under a cloudburst. So there are some other people who are not mentioned in the ayah. You might say they are in their homes and there's rain coming down and it's heavy rain, but they're actually happy. They're safe in their homes. This is like the believers. When the ayat are being revealed, all the ayat are bringing them goodness and guidance and happiness. Just like people who are in their homes when the rain is coming down, they're like, okay, our crops are getting watered. There's good. Our animals will drink, and the land will be green, and this is good. But those who are under the cloudburst, who are exposed, they're the ones who, for whom it is bad news. They will not benefit from this rain. They will find it to be an annoyance and even a danger. And the thunderclaps are causing them to stick their fingers in their ears. Here, the scholars of Balagha have this common example they give here. They say, يَجْعَلُونَ أَصَابِعَهُمْ فِي أَذَانِهِمْ. It literally would mean they place their whole fingers into their ears. But what's intended is, obviously the tips of the fingers. But the word is used in that way to imply like they're so scared that they're shoving their fingers into their ears. And Allah knows best.
Imam Biqai said the same thing, just about the squeezing the fingers, that they squeeze the tips in, but if they could, they would squeeze in all the fingers into their ears. That's how much fearful they are of death. In that analogy.
Yes.
Ustadh, should we combine the two or the two verses?
Yeah, we can do. Yeah.
We can comment on both. Yeah,
that makes sense. So the next ayah, يَكَادُ الْبَرْقُ يَخْطَفُ أَبْصَارَهُم. The lightning almost snatches away their sight. So this is obviously then telling us about how bright and powerful this lightning is. These strikes of warning, these strikes of revealed attack against the unbelievers. The lightning almost snatches away their sight. Every time it lights the way for them, they walk in it. But when it goes dark on them, they stand still. So in the image here, these are people who actually, they need the guidance to find their way. They don't have a way other than this. So they are waiting for any moment when they can be able to move. So that's a kullama. So there's a contrast between kullama أضاء لهم versus إذا أظلم عليهم. Right? Kullama is like every time. So they need, they're seeking out these moments. Then they walk in that light. But then it goes dark on them. When it goes dark on them, they stand still. If God so willed, he would take away their hearing and sight. Through the power of this thunder and lightning, God is capable of all things. So Ibn Ashur understands that this is referring still to the people in the image. Right? If God so willed, he would take away their hearing and sight. So the point being that the thunder and lightning are actually so strong that they could do this, but they just fall short of actually deafening them completely and blinding them completely. And in the same way, if Allah so willed, he could finish the hypocrites and he could end their schemes and he could completely destroy them. But he is also telling us that from his wisdom, it's from his will that they continue to exist and that they continue to have their way to some extent, because their time will come. God in his wisdom allows them to carry on their activities until such a time as he wills otherwise. Right? يَكَادُ الْبَرْقُ يَخْطَفُ أَبْصَارَهُم وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَذَهَبَ بِسَمْعِهِمْ وَأَبْصَارِهِمْ. If God so willed, he would take away everything from them. But their punishment will come at the time when God wills, and according to his wisdom. Right? According to his wisdom. So the power of Allah is not in question. The ability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is affirmed and emphasized. But in his wisdom, he wills for them to continue making things worse for themselves, wandering in their misguidance. وَيَمُدُّهُمْ فِي طُغْيَانِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ, as in the earlier ayah. So this image comes to, in a way, just encapsulate what has been covered in the ayat which preceded, and to put it in the form of imagery so that it becomes stronger in our minds.
Yeah. Ibn Kathir talks about, in relation to these two verses, this is why I asked the question at the very start of the class tonight. Says the truth sometimes appears, but their hearts are in a state of doubt, disbelief, and hypocrisy. So they don't take the truth. It doesn't become permanent with them. Like he says, the rainstorm is doubt and disbelief, and the thunder is what gives fear to their heart. So, but then he interprets lightning as what appears in the heart of Iman occasionally. So so it goes back and forth, because both verses talk about the lightning. So and the verse, it's when the lightning was about to get snatched away. Snatches their sight, and then whenever it strikes, they walk in its light. But whenever it stops, it covers them. The darkness covers them, and they stand still. So, that's how he interprets it as iman. Like, I guess going back to the previous verses as well, when the iman is not there, you're trying to use your own torch instead. You really can. Your sight is limited. Your reach is limited, and yeah.
Imam Baqai, while you're at the parallel, the three things: the zulumat, the ra'ad, and the barq, the darknesses, and the thunder and the lightning. He said the zulumat refers to the mutashabih verses. ambiguous verses, verses that are not very clear in meaning. The Ra'ad refers to, he says, the promises of paradise, Wa'ad.
So that's the thunder refers to that,
the
right?
thunder, the thunder referring to the promise of paradise, and the Barq, the Wa'id, the threats of hellfire. In one place, he connects it like that, and I think he
the other way around.
almost other, and he quotes his teacher as well. Well, not his teacher, his inspiration.
Al-Harali. So then, does he provide some kind of like other ayat that support this way of seeing it? Or this is like a kind of spiritual reading, or like I'm wondering if it's based on maybe the Barq in other places having this sense of a promise, or the Ra'ad having a sense of threat.
Yeah, I'm just quickly looking back. Harali says this. He says the dhulumat, darknesses, are like what they do not fully understand, and the thunder is what calls upon them with something that disgraces them and threatens them. Bil-fadihati wa tahdid. And wal barq, what signals to them its meaning. But then he builds on that. He himself, he later on says it, I can't exactly find where, but he says the mutashabih, the wa'ad and the wa'id. نعم. مثلا في سماع القرآن الذي فيه المتشابه والوعد والوعيد.
So I mean, they could be right in identifying like Ra'ad as this and Barq as that, but they might have intended it almost like the variety described in the ayah corresponds to the variety of things that they are experiencing, without it being important to say which one is the thunder, which one is the lightning.
Yeah.
Like they may have reasoning behind that. I don't doubt that they do, but also it's not so important that which one is which. It's more, Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions فيه ظلمات ورعد وبرق. So it makes us think about three things that ظلمات you can understand maybe as the things that they find difficult to understand and to process. So you get then people who, in the ayah about the mutashabihat, verse 7 of Ali Imran, right? It mentions فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِهِ. So there are people who have an evil inclination in their hearts, a kind of disease in their hearts, right? So this would bring to mind the munafiqeen, of course, who follow the mutashabih, the ambiguous, the difficult to interpret, the things that are of indecisive meaning. They cling on to that. They follow it through instead of doing what? Instead of going back to the foundational verses, the clearer verses, right? And this implies then that they impose some kind of meaning on it that suits their purpose. فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِهِ. Right? So in the first place, their purpose is to cause dissension, to cause dispute. So I think it's interesting and useful that Imam Harali and Imam Biqa'i are drawing this connection here with these dhulumat, that perhaps it refers to those things which contain some unclarity of meaning, which for the believers is just something that they then affirm their iman in it. Number two, they refer to the things that are foundational and clear. But those who are so inclined can use them for nefarious purposes. So that's an interesting connection.
Just going back to you said this page. You said I feel like talks about the psychology of the hypocrites. What Ustadh Sohaib just reminded me, Surah Nisa, verses 142 and 143, where it says, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ, and the verse continues and talks about the hypocrites. And then the next verse says, مُذَبْذَبِينَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ, La ilaha ula wa la ilaha ula. Neither he nor they. So you said about the variety of things in the verse, like
Yeah.
even Kathir talks about the lightning being perhaps traces of Iman, and then there's the thunder being the fear that they have in their heart, or whether being exposed or other fears. But they're not stable. They go back and forth. So I just thought I'll share that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the lightning here at the beginning is being used in a negative way because it almost snatches their vision. But then when it lights up is when they walk, and when it doesn't. It's as if everything has a negative effect on them. All positive things, even the pouring rain itself is a big, scary thing for them. There's a hadith in Imam Tirmidhi. It's not very connected, but because it's mentioned in Imam Qurtubi's tafsir, I'll mention it. But apparently some Jews came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked, Ya Abul Qasim, inform us about the thunder, what is it? And he says, an angel among the angels who is responsible for the clouds. He has a piece of fire wherever that he drives the clouds, wherever Allah wills. So he takes the clouds. And then they said, then what is the noise we hear? He says, it is him striking the clouds when he drives on them until it goes where it is ordered. And then they've said, you have told the truth. This often happens at hadiths like this. And back in those times, it gives this spiritual meaning to these celestial objects. For the Ahl Kitab scholars back then, it increased them in faith, or it might have made them come into Islam. In our modern times, because we have a different understanding of these causes, sometimes it causes more doubt for people. There is this whole discussion that these things can happen in another parallel world, Alam al-Mithal. Shah Waliullah Dehlawi speaks about these things, So we don't have to always see this as contradictory. But there is some of descriptions of a thunder and all that being shown like this. Although the verse is giving an analogy, I just thought to mention it.
Yeah, I did get caught in a very heavy rain once in my life as a teenager. Well, I was coming back from school with my sisters, and like there's so much uncertainty. Like you can't even see a few meters ahead. You're just trying to get to a shelter. You can't find your way. You can't see properly. I'm not too sure if you've ever had that experience, Ustadh Sadeq or Ustadh Sohaib, but it's a very, very scary thing, like especially at a younger age.
So I mean, just thinking about the phenomena, like we've got this hadith that you mentioned, which looks at things from a certain angle. The Qur'an also, when talking about these phenomena, is describing them generally as being a system of causes. There is a whole water cycle. The clouds form in certain ways, and ayah 43 of Surah An-Nur I was just looking at just now, because it talks about how the clouds are then constructed, and then يَكَادُ سَنَا بَرْقِهِ يَذْهَبُ بِالْأَبْصَارِ. So even it attributes the thunder, it seems, to the hail, which is mentioned before that, right? So it's there are also physical causes to things, and within that the spiritual reality, because then Allah says وَيُسَبِّحُ الرَّعْدُ بِحَمْدِهِ, and then the thunder sings his exaltation and praises. So it is these things are realities which intersect, right? And obviously the Quran is calling us to make use of our experience, as Ustadh Ahmed just shared, an experience of something he's been in, to then apply that to a situation which is not mahsus, which is not physically experienced. And just to reiterate that with this image, it is possible to look at it from different angles and see the elements in different ways. Imam al-Qurtubi also summarizes it, I think, in a way a little bit different from some of what we covered before. He says that The rainstorm is the darkness of kufr and their beliefs and so on. The thunder and lightning is the punishments that await them. Or you could see the rainstorm is the Qur'an as it baffles them. The darkness is their misguidance. The thunder and is the threats and warnings in the Qur'an. The lightning is the clear proofs and arguments in the Qur'an, right? As opposed to what was mentioned before as maybe the promises, right? And the thunderclaps, min as-sawa'iq, it could refer to how the Quran calls them to strive in the way of Allah and to give up their property and lives. So those are also the things that they are running away from, as we see this theme coming back again in the Quran, that there are those who are ready to do what it takes to defend the Muslim lives and lands, and there are others who will run away, and they might even claim that yes, we are waiting for jihad to be mandated, and then when a surah comes which contains that, they run away. So the image is not restricted to one way of seeing it, but it may actually then have further meanings the more we connect it to more situations, and that is the richness of the Quran itself, right? The richness is that it is not limited in its meaning and its applications.
Beautiful. And the experiences of every person can change. Yeah. Should we give a short break, inshallah? Ustadh Sohaib, 5-minute break?
Inshallah, sounds good.
We'll come back 8 past the hour, inshallah.
8 past, yeah. Jazakallah khair, tamam. Okay.
Okay. Ustadh Saeed, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, beautiful, inshallah. تفضل أستاذ صادق.
أقلكم بالتجويد سيقرأ إن شاء الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. الذي جعل لكم الأرض فراشا والسماء بناء وأنزل من السماء ماء فأخرج به من الثمرات رزقا لكم فلا تجعلوا لله أندادا وأنتم تعلمون. وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين. فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين. صدق الله العظيم.
Barakallahu feekum. So inshallah I will share the translation just now. So these ayat are translated without expanding them first. Mankind, worship your sustainer who created you and those before you so that you may attain to piety. Him who made the earth a spread for you and the sky a canopy, who sent water down from the sky and thereby brought out fruits to nourish you. So do not set up rivals to God while you possess knowledge. And if you should be in doubt concerning that which we have been sending down to our servant, then produce a surah from its like and call upon the supporters you have instead of God if you are right. If you cannot do that, and you never will, then beware of the fire which is fueled by humans and stones. It has been prepared for the disbelievers. So we can begin by looking a little closer at the first of these ayahs, or perhaps these two, perhaps we'll take them together. Mankind, worship your sustainer. And of course, Rabbakum, the word Rabb we encountered in Surah al-Fatiha, and the layers of meaning in that. Typically, we would just translate it as Lord, and that's fine. But the word Rabb contains this aspect of also nurturing, guiding, supporting life, and so sustainer, gives us some of that meaning. And saying your Lord, and this is idafa towards idafa to all of mankind, implies then you have one Lord, right? It's not talking about these different things that you call arbab. But u'budu rabbakum then means worship the one God, the one God of all, who deserves absolute devotion for having created you and those before you. And before you, min qablikum implies, all the way back. There are people who think that they were created by themselves, or they came from their parents, and they came from their grandparents. Well, at some point you have to admit that someone was not born from someone else, but rather was created. So Allah has created all of you so that you may attain to piety. So worship so that you may attain to piety. Taqwa here is used closer to its typical full religious meaning, as opposed to in the beginning of the surah, when the Qur'an was described as Huda lil Muttaqeen. There, the sense contextually maybe more like those who are trying to avoid all things of misguidance and find the right path. So for them, the Quran is guidance because they will benefit from following this guidance. Here now, so that you may reach those levels, those higher levels of taqwa, which implies all these different things, which perhaps we can talk about more. And this comes after those ayat about the unbelievers. One way to see that connection is that this is now speaking to all those groups who have been mentioned before. And for those who belong perhaps to the camp of the unbelievers or the hypocrites, there is a way back, and this is now what is being highlighted here. So then Allah Azza wa Jal is described with some more attributes which make him deserving of our worship. Him who made the earth a comfortable spread for you. So the earth has been made a place where which we can inhabit, where we can get what we need, we can rest, we can enjoy. It is not a place of toil and yes, there is toil and yes, there is difficulty experienced on the earth, but you have been provided what you need. And the sky, a protective canopy for you.
Sorry,
So-
Ustadh Sohaib, maybe should I just mention a few things to what you said about Rabb and Taqwa now?
Yeah, of course.
Or
Yeah,
you- yeah, maybe before you continue on verse 22. Like you mentioned, now the surah's taken on a sort of a different thing. It's done with explaining these three categories. So now the address is for all, and it's inviting all of them, all three of them back in a way. Sometimes you can find opposing interpretations. So Imam Baqai says that he says there's an implicit threat to humanity at large, and that's why it's not given in the tongue of the Prophet, but the address is direct, and it's not befitting because he is Rahmatan lil Alameen. Although I read another interpretation that says because it's about to give a very weighty task to humanity, which is ibadah, God speaks directly, so the pleasure of the speech reduces the weight of the burden in one way. And he also focuses on the word Rabb, and he says something nice. He goes, because humans have been, we connect more with rububiyyah, proofs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, than uluhiyyah. And so he almost talks about why psychologically it's, sometimes he analyzes why the wording, the nazm of the ayat is there, so we can attain faith more, the faith can penetrate us more deeper and more quicker. And he says we connect more with the rububiyyah, and so because we've been created where anyone that does good for us, al-insanu abidul ihsan, right? The human is the servant of ihsan. So when you're remembering God's favors, and the word Rabb has those favors, tarbiyah, then you're naturally going to connect with that more quicker. Yeah, and I personally thought by it saying worship the one who has created you and those before you, it's more convincing to the mind because it already knows of those before us, instead of saying worship those who has created you and those after you. Well, the after you one, it doesn't exist yet at that stage. Yeah, these are some points I had. Now, some have said because the u'budu, the waw there is worship your Lord, it's to many different levels. For the unbeliever that was addressed in earlier verses, it means come and believe in God. For the munafiq, that 14, 13 verses, it's calling for ikhlas. And for the believer, it's at the high levels to become one of the khawas, one of the special muttaqi. And same thing can be said about taqwa, each level matching each level. So sometimes it's, maybe if Ustadh Sohaib can correct me, but sometimes we're talking about there's one Qur'an, but there's a different meaning of Qur'an based on the receptor's level of faith and level of spiritual psychology. The meaning is different. It manifests or it shines differently for each person based on their own receptive abilities. Allahu alam.
Yeah, that makes sense, because also we are supposed to process the Quran in a way that we sensibly interpret, right? So who is intended? Ya ayyuhan nas is speaking to all of humanity, right? And this is something which occurs in many places in the Quran, you know, and typically it's thought of as being more of a Makki thing, to the extent that sometimes they say, well, if you see Ya Ayyuhan Nas, this is a Meccan surah. Well, of course, this is not a Meccan surah, so it's not a hard and fast rule that this is a Meccan phenomenon. But you know, generally in the Medinan Quran, we more frequently see Ya Ayyuhalladhina Amanu, a direct address to the believers, as we see in this surah as well, and Ya Ahlul Kitab, or people of the book, comes in this surah as well. But Ya Ayyuhan Nas is especially on those important things that apply to everyone, and at the core of that is monotheism and the abandonment of shirk, right? Ibn Ashur says that he looked at the occurrences and he finds there's always some mention of shirk. I mean, to check and follow up on his observation, but here, of course, la taj'alu lillahi andada, and don't set up rivals to God. So it seems that this is intending the mushrikeen on a certain level and intending the others on other levels, as you said. And generally, we, you know, as the listener of the Quran, you want to see, how does this apply to me? As interpreters of the Quran, if we're doing that, we want to see what are the various ways in which it applies. I was interested just to understand better what you mentioned, that there's an implicit threat. So where was the threat aspect that al-Baqarah was talking about? Was that sort of within this ayah, or in what's going to follow, about, you know, the if you don't meet the, you know, if you are going to challenge the Quran and you're going to not follow it, then is it referring to what's going to come there, or is it sort of even here there's an implicit threat?
Yeah, I can't pick it up exactly where, but it says, since the beginning, وَلَمَّا ضُمِّنَ صَدْرُهَا مِنَ الْوَعِيدِ في حق رسوله فلم يجري خطاب ذلك على لسانه. So because there's some sort of implicit threat, I understand the beginning of the verse says some sort of a wa'id, some sort of a threat in the case of about the Prophet ﷺ. The khitab is not it's direct from Allah to the human beings, but I'm not sometimes reading Baqarah is a puzzle and I need to copy and paste, and I send it to the group for you guys to check.
I'll have a dig into it, so maybe I'll understand that better as well.
Yeah, but him and his teacher say that this verse is one of the most it includes all the verses and the da'wah that's in the entire Quran can be fit into this verse. So these first verse of Baqarah and the Fatiha, they're very filled with, like, you can almost squeeze major parts of the Quran back into them. This is one of those verses. They're saying it's very all-encompassing. Allah.
Surah Baqarah itself is believed to encompass the Quran. So there must be verses in there as well, which does that. So these are some of the verses. We haven't really kind of gone on to the next verse, but which talks about he's the one who has made the earth a place of settlement. I know Ustadh Sohaib has read the translation early on, so but there are other verses from the Quran which are very similar as well, like, which again talks about the earth, the heavens, how he created you, وَصَوَّرَكُمْ فَأَحْسَنَ صُوَرَكُمْ, how he has shaped you and how beautifully he has shaped you. وَرَزَقَكُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ, and he has given you sustenance, from good things. So these are all the things that we share as well, like as humanity. The verse, the previous verse starts with Ya Ayyuhan Nas, and then the following verse really talks about the common denominators that we share as well, that Allah has given us of these blessings, whether it's hidden or apparent. So as our sustainer, our creator, our owner, our provider, like these are all the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which are really covered in these two verses. And as Ustadh Sohaib said, the biggest thing that comes, فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Right, so, and to that Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh, he says, I once asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what evil deed is the worst with Allah? He said, أَن تَجْعَلَ لِلَّهِ نِدًّا وَهُوَ خَلَقَكَ. Right, so to take equals with Allah while He is the one who has created you. The Prophet describes it as the most evil deed, which is a type of shirk perhaps. But Imam Razi, maybe Ustadh Sohaib might touch on that as well, but he apparently uses this verse as an argument for the existence of the Creator. Like how, the verse talks about the heavens being a canopy, the earth, and so forth. But Imam Sa'id Nursi as well, in his treatise where he talks about the Hashr, when he is proving the Hashr, he uses the verse from Surah Rum, right? It was, I think, verse number 30. فَانظُرْ إِلَىٰ آثَارِ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ كَيْفَ يُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. Again, he uses the earth. He says, look at the creation of the merciful, how he revives the earth after its death. In that case, he uses the earth again, the world, to prove Hashr, resurrection. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, obviously, and many others have done that as well. But there's also something nice. A Bedouin was once asked about the evidence of Allah and His existence. He responds, all praise is due to Allah. The camel's dung testifies to the existence of the camel, and the track testifies to the fact that someone was walking. A sky that holds the giant stars, a land that has fairways, and a sea that has waves, does not all of this testify that the most kind, most knowledgeable exists? So this is a Bedouin who's believed to live in a desert, perhaps not as civilized.
It's better in Arabic, that one.
Yeah, do you want to give us Arabic, Ustadh? I mean, I could pull it out too, but
what's the whole quote? البعرة تدل على البعير والأثر يدل على المسير. It was very, very eloquent. Here we are. Let me find it from Twitter. فمساء ذات أبراج وأرض ذات فجاج وبحار ذات أمواج ألا تدل على العليم اللطيف الخبير. So it's like it's a natural thing to see, the connection between the creation and the one who has planned and designed that, right? So even just a simple thing, this is a watch. You wouldn't look at it and think, well, that was that sort of came about by itself. It's absurd to think that, and yet people have been in a way trained or conditioned to look at the world around them through those eyes and not to recognize that there is great wisdom and beauty which points to a wise and knowing creator and powerful creator. So I looked, by the way, into what al-Baqarah said, and what I think that he's saying is this is like a passage which is now addressed to all these categories, and a couple of ayahs later it's going to say, if you are in doubt as to what we have sent down to our servant, right? So then there's a warning as to those who are going to doubt the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it was more appropriate then that Allah Azza wa Jal then speaks directly in this way. It doesn't say "Qul ya ayyuhan nas," but just says "Ya ayyuhan nas." So Allah is speaking to them and said, "Do you doubt what we are sending down to our servant?" As opposed to him then having to say, "Do you doubt what Allah is sending to me?" And then to threaten them in that way. So that's what I think the point is that he's sharing there. Shall we come back to the translation?
No, Jazakallah khair.
So worship him who made the earth a comfortable spread for you and the sky a protective canopy for you, who sent water down from the sky and thereby brought out fruits to nourish you. So do not set up rivals to God while you possess knowledge, which should prevent you from such things. That's kind of in brackets. So this is, obviously a vast, opening for pondering and for investigating. And as you very eloquently said already, Ustadh Ahmed, this is the way that we then encounter God. Imam al-Razi does indicate like this, that these things point to God, and we should know Him through His created signs, as well as the things that we hear. It should be the things that we see and observe, right? The sight is then for all the senses of observation, and the meaning of this, of course, has its sort of simple levels, and then we can continue to appreciate the ways in which the sky is a canopy, right? So that could be understood by the Bedouin Arabs hearing it at the time of revelation, but it can be understood in new ways as time goes on. And Ibn Ashur actually talks here about the phenomenon of scientific miracles. Now, that can open up some debate as to what would that mean, but in short, he is saying that these things, whatever we discover as time goes on, continues to confirm what the Quran is talking about, and then increase your faith as well, right? So in what ways is the sky like a canopy? Well, there are certain ways that couldn't have been known at that time, in that it even protects us from what is above. And that can be certain types of, radioactive rays and materials that are bounced back by our immediate sky, the atmosphere within the earth, and then by some things that are also out there past the earth, which could be seen as part of the sky. So these things, even if we don't read it through the lens of scientific miracles per se, it's just the openness of the Quranic expression which allows us to appreciate it more and more as our knowledge of the physical world increases and improves. Who sent down water from the sky, thereby brought out fruits to nourish you. All of this is imtinan, that is to say, it is causing us to appreciate the blessings, prompting us to appreciate what He has given us and to be thankful to Him, as well as to recognize His greatness and His power. So after all that, فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا, the fa is like, knowing that, do not set up rivals to God. That's in your mind, that you set up some equal to God. And that is not so common a word in the Quran for this, but it's exactly related to the concept of shirk, of course, equating others to God. بِرَبِّهِمْ يَعْدِلُونَ, right? They equate others to God. Do not set up rivals to God while you possess knowledge. And this is understood in more than one way. For Ibn Ashur, it's almost like a kind of gentle praise or acknowledgement that you, the people listening to this, who might be involved in shirk, you have some knowledge. God has given you faculties. You have the ability to know things and to know the difference between right and wrong. So while you have that, don't debase your knowledge and debase your rational faculties by setting up rivals to God. So it's not just while you know that God is one, but while you know anything. Like if you have brains to think, don't go doing these actions of shirk, which go against the basics of this, rational process. This is a rational ayah, as well as, of course, appealing to the emotion.
Yeah, in terms of rational, Imam Bukhari says that it's anyone with any knowledge should show by ilm al-daruri. It necessitates almost that no one who depends on the earth, the sky, and the water can be a god. And these things are known by necessity. So you should never take up any of these as a god.
As it said about Isa alayhi salam and his mother, kana yakulani at-ta'am. They used to eat food, and that's enough. Saying that is enough for you to realize, well, yeah, what kind of God would need to eat food?
The tafsirs in terms of munasabat, they like to say that it began with the anfusi ayat, began with the self, that we created you and those before you. So Imam Bukhari says, because human knows himself the best, then he knows his species, then the earth where all his where he lives, his maskan is, and the sky where he gets everything from, and the water. So they're saying there's a lot of tertib in these wisdom and miracles in the tertib. The bit I like how Ustadh Sohaib, you mentioned in the thing that you also mentioned called upon to look at the closest thing, the earth first. You've said in your side table, and then the one beyond the sky. So I think this tends to be more of a pattern of the Quran. It begins with the Anfusi verses first, and then the Afaqi. The verse which mentions Anfusi, I know it mentions the Afaq first, then Anfusim, but it tends to, if I'm not mistaken, we can keep an eye out. This seems to be a bit of a pattern. Allahu Alam.
Yeah, there's some discussion around أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Don't they look at the camel, how it was created? وَإِلَى السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ رُفِعَتْ وَإِلَى الْجِبَالِ كَيْفَ نُصِبَتْ وَإِلَى الْأَرْضِ كَيْفَ سُطِحَتْ. So sometimes the journey can be rounded about, but it does begin with the ibil, which is like for them it was their close companion, and all these wonders in the camel right in front of them before their very eyes, before looking now at the sky, and then in a way sort of coming down from there to the mountains and then to the earth. So sometimes the movement is like that, but still so beautiful, the way that your mind's eye is caused to move.
It makes a subtle point. Sometimes this one sentences of Imam Baqai catches me, and I go, I must capture it. He says the fa'akhraja. It points that how, in a way, water plays a role in the causation of those fruits coming out. Who sent water down from the sky, and thereby, as Ustadh Sohaib was translated, and thereby brought out fruits.
Yeah,
fa'akhraja. So, and he says a nice sentence. He says, and to bring things out, ikhrajul ashya, with curtains of causes, it's the most befitting and appropriate for obligating belief in the unseen, because that's what makes iman a test. Because he says, لولا الأسباب لما ارتاب المرتاب. If it wasn't for causes, no one would have doubted. But in this world, causes playing a role. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing that He does things with causes, but He's showing His tawheed through the verses, showing everything. But it's the causes it plays an important role for creating a test for iman, the ghaib. So he makes a bit of a point about that.
This world is a world of hikmah, with all the wisdoms, and then the other
some
world
have said, in this world there's more hikmah, which requires causes. In the other world, it's more qudra. So they say even if someone wants to plant a seed in Jannah, the moment he puts the seed in, it comes out as a tree.
Power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fully manifested.
Some nice little things. The min thamarat points to the fact that not all fruits are rizq, and not all the fruit is rizq, but only some of it. In other verses, it says from the sperm, that He's created. That also some have indicated to us, that Sohaib said some scientific miracles that is only one of the sperm. That, some things like that. But I won't take up time because we.
So, shall we read the next ayahs as well?
Yeah.
No.
وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, and if you should be in doubt concerning that which we have been sending down to our servant, then produce a surah from its like. So up till here, the language doesn't require too much comment, but before, Allah Azza wa said, لا ريب فيه. There's no doubt in it or concerning it. But then if you are the kind of person who nevertheless has doubts, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, concerning that which we have been sending down to our servant, نَزَّلْنَا, it's commonly said, and Ibn Ashur follows this here, that nazzala implies a gradual revelation. So that which he has received over time, as opposed to something which is sent down all at once. That which we have been sending down to our servant, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then produce a surah from its like. Now, this can be understood in more than one way. One is to produce a surah from a book purporting to be equivalent to the Qur'an. So in your mind, you imagine that there is another Qur'an, then show us a surah from that Qur'an that you purport to exist. Or bring us a surah from someone like him. Min mithlihi can mean from someone like him. This is not common. I don't know if you'll find it in other translations. I haven't checked. But bring a surah from someone like him, min mithlihi, i.e. someone like the Prophet ﷺ. In what respect? As someone who is unlettered, who is unschooled, who is untaught by man. Can such a person be producing something of this kind of eloquence? Because this issue of the likeness, Ibn Ashur has some discussion on this, of course, as you'd expect. But one thing I found him arguing quite interestingly, and not so common to see, he says the likeness is not just in the features, the inherent features of the Qur'an, so something that looks like the Qur'an and has the eloquence of the Qur'an. That's not just what the challenge is touching on, but also the circumstances in which it was produced, because you might bring something that's very eloquent, and even someone might argue and claim that it matches the eloquence of the Qur'an, but that was done by your top poet, the poet laureate, who is renowned for their, all the poems that they have been producing over all these years. You show us something that's, where is this Prophet ﷺ getting these words of such unrivaled power, which are actually outdoing all the eloquence of the Arabs? So he sees it as being sort of intricately connected, and that's why min mithlihi might actually point to both meanings, right? So bring its like from someone like him, right? So I think that's a really interesting Ibn Ashurian kind of way of looking at things. And call upon the supporters, and he sees this first of all as referring to their gods. So call upon your gods to help you. If there's a god other than God, then let them give you a Qur'an like this Qur'an, right? And call upon the supporters, i.e. false deities you have instead of God, or call upon your eloquent colleagues, the best of the Arabs in their speech, and call upon witnesses who would testify that this is matching the Qur'an. If you are right, in what sense to claim that the Qur'an is human speech. And of course, this challenge is here given after challenges have been given in earlier surahs. So first of all, in Surah Al-Isra, where they are told to bring the entire Qur'an, something equivalent to the Qur'an. And then they are told to bring 10 surahs in Surah Hud. And then one surah in Surah Yunus, and then here. So this then is sort of reiterating that challenge which had existed before. وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا. If you cannot do that, and you never will, then be sure that this revelation is true and follow it, or else beware of the fire. So in a way, you have to kind of understand something implied here, because if you cannot do it, then beware of the fire. It doesn't mean you cannot do it, therefore you're going to go to hellfire for having failed the challenge. Rather, failing the challenge should make you realize that you were wrong, that the Qur'an is right, and that the hellfire is true, the hereafter is true. So have fear of that fire and believe in the one who is warning you of it, right? So that's a slightly different way of seeing it. But you should follow it, or else you will be subject to the fire, which is fueled by humans and stones. And those stones may simply be stones of sulfur and so on, as Ibn Abbas said, radallahu anhuma, or it may mean the idols as well, as that there's other ayat which say you and those you worship are the fuel of the hellfire which you will enter. It has been prepared for the disbelievers.
Of course, we can't say anything if Ibn Ashur said something, one of the greatest mufassirs of our time. But sometimes that other meaning you put in the brackets slightly makes me a bit uncomfortable, Ustadh Sohaib, to be very honest. Like mithlihi, from our Prophet, and if it's referring to that. But anyway, I can't say. The only reason being
do say, because you can't just be uncomfortable and then sort of like leave it at that. So
Well,
do you
I'll
think
say
that-
this because it sort of implies the meaning like it's extra. It's a miracle because the Prophet was, ummi, unlettered, if we use that word, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wiser than any lettered person that walked on the face of the earth. Because of that, there's the ijaz of the Quran is in that. But if we look at the verse,
is this not a Quranic meaning also?
But the verse of the Quran also says, call upon your shuhada min dunillahi. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, what does it say in Surah Hajj about the wing of the fly? It says, even call upon your shuraka, doesn't it? If I'm not mistaken. I'll just quickly check. Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, and it pretty much call upon everyone you can but Allah. So it says, call upon your lettered, your unlettered, your gods, your poets, everyone you can, to come up with something like the Quran. You will not be able to. So, maybe from that angle, maybe I'm only against it because in the meaning that it gives to the listener, that mithlihi, as if other Qurans can come from others that are not like him. But maybe that's not the right meaning. That's what sometimes a little bit I prefer the other meaning. But yeah, that's just my personal thing. But it's a great tahaddi. Like it's the confidence that the Prophet comes. Imagine, Hasha. Like I think it was, if you were, just imagine if you're someone faking something, you're gonna claim you're coming down with a book. Everything of yours is being put under threat. You're challenging humanity at large. But then you're saying, if you can bring a proof like it, or even a chapter like it, it just shows the absolute confidence this is not from the Prophet ﷺ. For me, these verses give me a big iman boost.
Yeah, and Ibn Kathir actually says that this is also proof of the truth of prophethood, like that he's able to do this. Like, I mean, this verse itself is a proof of the Prophet's prophethood. So,
like Nuh alayhi salam, what does he say after 900 years? The threats get really serious. He goes, how about all of you right now? Don't give me a moment spare. Come make a plot and act on me. And kill me if you can. He's saying, kill me if you can. Like, honestly, and he's by himself. All he's got is a few weak followers, but he's challenging him. This challenge is like as significant. It would not come from a psychology of someone who's invented something, trying to.
Because the power back in those days, and again, Ibn Kathir touches on this as well, is poetry, right? So anything that's going to come close to the Quran at the time is these poems and the poetry. So the Quran is challenging the very core of the power at the time. Nuh alayhi salam, maybe, obviously that's physical force perhaps at the time, but we know the best poems are hung on the Kaaba. People go to war with a couplet and they stop wars with another couplet. But the Quran comes and the Prophet with that challenges everyone else. Sorry, I've cut you off.
No. In terms of munasabat, he says that once it has become clear, Imam Baqai, that based on all the preceding proofs that this is the word of God, and then he says it literally, goes in meaning, fil ma'na, but also nazman, in the order of it, because he's looking at Nazm al-Durar is the name of his tafsir. He says then it's nothing left for them but to fully submit, and hence these verses of tahaddi. He says the al-ati bil-amr, Sheikh al-Harrali, Ustadh Sohaib, he translates it, it means someone coming from a position of standing and strength. So there's those implications as well. Fa'tu bi. I don't know if there was anything you try to capture on that, if it changes the translation.
I'm not really clear that there's something particular about Ityan. There is some discussion about, this difference between Ityan and Maji in the Quran, but none of it really leads to any firm conclusion. So, so I think the translation that we put is just produce a surah We could say produce as a kind of
Yeah.
getting there directly, or come up with, if you want the word come in there to match with Itian. But it's more like, then show us what you've got. Fatu bi surah.
Yeah.
Bring it in front of us and present it to us. That's the kind of sense that you get from it.
If I'm not mistaken, I remember reading once, I had to give a khutbah, and I was looking at the Ifk incident. The lie they accuse of Mother Aisha. What does it say? Usbatun ja'a. Ustadh Sohaib, you can help us maybe? Here we go. إن الذين جاءوا بالإفك. Over there, it's as if it's such a big slander that they've come with the news. In a way where when you've come with something, it's got negative connotations. But anyway, that's not related to our cousin. إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. When he was touching on that, I remember that verse, but yeah, this one it says it comes from a place of quwwa wa mukna.
Just going back on the Qur'an being miracle, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that every prophet was given a miracle, the type of which brings mankind to faith. What I was given is a revelation that Allah has sent down to me, yet I hope that I will have the most following on the resurrection, both in Bukhari and Muslim. And we were just talking with Ustadh Suhail before this, with this AI, like is it possible to replicate the Quran or parts of it? Like we're seeing some interesting things that's happening at the moment. It'd be interesting to see what's going to come up, to be honest.
I have a brother, he's a chaplain at a university in America, Chaplain Bilal Sabit. He said he played around with it a lot, and he said, I came to the conclusion that Allah's challenge still stands clear. AI was not able to. But I think now they're disallowed to produce parts of Revelation, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, this goes back to a question of definition and also how the challenge is set up. Because if you look at sometimes the debates that happen on this, even amongst some people who are critics and challengers or opponents of Islam, these people who label themselves as ex-Muslims, these kind of people. So they put out these things and then they say, oh, you Muslims will never accept anything that we say anyway. And that's correct. Actually, we won't. Let's be honest about it. Anything that you say will never compare for us to the Quran, and we're not going to entertain it. Therefore, the nature of this challenge is not one that can really be, in my personal view, seen as a standing challenge with regards to the language aspect. But that's for several reasons. It's not because we are unfair and we are biased, but how can we not be? Essentially, we are going to judge it against a Quran that has been here for 14 centuries and has been studied and memorized and written on our walls and written on our hearts, and then you're going to put something else there. However fair you might want to be, you can't say, oh yeah, your invented thing is just as good as the Quran. It's never going to happen that way. But also, that is not necessarily what the challenge is set up to say. This challenge was being directly given to the most eloquent of people. There will never be anyone in history who manages to attain to their level of eloquence in the Arabic language. And there's actually a little bit of debate about that nowadays. Are the Jahili poets better or the Abbasi or whatever? So that might not even be a worthwhile debate. But it's certainly not the 21st century poets. They're not in the game, they're not in the game by any means. So if they could not do it, that is the proof. That's the literary challenge remains in a sense that on an individual level, for us to engage with the Quran and experience this linguistic miracle, that is still there. The linguistic miracle is there, but it's not something that is now, let's throw out the challenge and see, or let's see what AI can do. What is AI going to do? AI can only draw from what it's given. So it's going to be given the Quran, and is going to be given the Arabic language. What is the Arabic language? After the Quran, the Arabic language is shaped by the Quran. There is no separate independent thing called the Arabic language that you're going to construct the Quran out of. All the rules of Nahu depend upon the Quran. All the norms of Balagha depend upon the Quran. So it is a little bit, maybe misplaced that some of our preachers would talk about this challenge as one that, in a sense, is still open, rather than one which is a closed case and was won by the Quran, right? The people who had the opportunity, the ability technically, and
The motivation.
to oppose the Quran failed to do so. And some would say even the fact that they failed so completely, there was this view amongst some of the Mu'tazila early on that actually it's not even their technical inability, but that God has, through divine intervention, diverted them from that. This is called sarfa, right? So that was a view that was around early on, and later on it kind of got supplanted by an acceptance among the scholars that actually the ability technically was always there. The challenge was open to them. And even we have some narrations about certain attempts here and there to mimic the Quran or to produce something like it, which, these narrations show us something very laughable. But it's more something that I think was immediately known to them that, well, yes, we can't do that, right? So the instruction is there, not as with the expectation that they're going to sit around a table and try, but more that instinctively they could see right away that this is something they cannot do, because they were not dealing with something that was within their scope of ability. Just like the magicians at the time of Moses, when they are doing their tricks and they're having their spears and so on, their sticks dance around, then they see Musa alayhi salam do something. He throws down a stick and it gobbles up their sticks. Immediately they don't say, oh, let's go and try that. They can see that's not magic. That is not magic. In the same way the Arabs knew that is not poetry. Even if they said, and the Quran reports that they say, oh, it's just the word of a poet, it's just the word of a soothsayer. They knew that is not poetry, that is not soothsaying, that is not just a nice khutbah in the genres that we are familiar with. This is something else. So in my belief, the haddi is here immediately doing ta'jeez of them. It is saying to them, oh yeah, go ahead, let's see it then, while knowing that they would never be able to rise to that because they would immediately fall flat on their faces.
Case is open and closed at the same time. Huh?
Open and closed at the same time. Absolutely.
I just want to mention on the weekend, my brother mentioned a poem of Allama Iqbal. This last bit
Maybe we could finish with that.
Yeah, that you find the rocks, and apparently I when I was in India, I learned Quran from a Hafiz, a young orphan Imam, may Allah preserve him if he's alive. And he taught us this poem, but then I was told that the background to this poem was Allama Iqbal sees a dream where he goes into Jahannam and there's no fire. And then he asks the people, where's the fire? And they say, there's no fire in Jahannam. People bring it with their actions. So when I heard of that dream, and he says, Amal se zindagi banti hai, jannat bhi, jahannam bhi, ye khaak apni fitrat mein, na nuri hai na nari. It's with actions that life is made, and Jannat and Jahannam. And this soil of your fitrat, it's not nuri, it doesn't have light, it's not blessed, nor is it nari, nor is it hellfire-like. It just, I said if I could back this up, it would be with this ayah that, وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. That's the only thing. Allahu Alam. There can be wrong ways to understand this poem, but that would be one way you could see it as. Allahu Alam.
Okay, maybe we could wrap it up with that. Ustadh Saeed, was there anything else before we wrapped up for tonight, inshallah?
No, just I guess a little admin thing. I was going to say that we're doing one page in these episodes, but inshallah our intention is now to go at double this pace. So we were all sort of warming up, both the presenters, those who are preparing this material, and I think in a sensible way, this is probably good for the students who are following along as well, to get a little bit familiarized with the content and our way of discussing it. And we're warming up in our way. So inshallah, from here on, we'll be doing double the amount. So it'll be 2 mushaf pages. So we aim to get through one page before the break, one page after the break, inshallah.
The tahaddi is to do 2 pages next week.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it means that the amount of depth would change, but
that's right. Yeah.
you know, but our focus is on getting the key lessons and the
Inshallah.
and the things that we all need to know.
Inshallah.
I ask everyone for du'as for tawfiq to go through 2 pages of Imam Bukhari. Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. See you next week.
Jazakumullah khair, Ustadh Sohaib.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.